Good afternoon to all of you. Welcome to the panel on ICT infrastructure in Africa. We have a great panel ahead of us. My name is Ibrahima, and I run an advisory firm out of Dakar, Senegal. I can assure you this is not going to be another session talking about opportunities and challenges on ICT. I think we've done that yesterday with the presidents. We all understand it's very important for Africa. It's also important for the development of the continent. So what I'd like to focus today, and that's the reason why the panelists were carefully selected to make sure we can have the private sector answers to the challenges of the sector as opposed to just talking about the big ideas. The sector has obviously evolved a lot, particularly on the mobile sector, but we have a long way to go in investing in the fundamentals of the sector. That's the fibers and the satellite and so on. So to help me actually address those questions and concerns, I'm delighted to have on stage Mr. Nick Rudnick, who will give us his perspective from his company, which is Liquid Telecom, based in London, but also doing work in Africa. I have invited Mr. Dramane Touré from the Gambia, who is based in Senegal, my home country, to give us his perspective as somebody who is actually involved in the sector from a data perspective. And last but not least, Mike Puro from South Africa, who is already bringing his perspective as a bank who is involved in the sector and from a financial perspective. And Nick, I'm going to start with you. As I said to you backstage, a lot has been done in investing in mobile. And I think if you look at the numbers today in Africa, it's quite impressive that we have access to mobile all over Africa. So the question is, the sector, it's not about mobile, it's also about investing in the fundamentals. Give us your perspective. You are investing in the sector. What are the fundamentals that we need to be investing in? Fiber, satellite, and so on. And what are you doing as a firm in Africa?
Well, I think if you go back 14 years and look at the telecommunications industry in Africa, you find a situation whereby most Africans had never heard a telephone ring, never mind have one in their pockets. Going forward 14 years, we're now in a position where most Africans do have a telephone in their pocket. And it's something that I experienced growing up in Zimbabwe, is that it was very difficult to get a telephone, in fact, often impossible. And that has been completely revolutionized by the advent of mobile telephony. But it is still very difficult, if not impossible, to access the internet in the way that people do here in Europe. What we do know is that over the last 10 years, $100 billion worth of investment has gone into the telecommunications industry in Africa. And that $100 billion, the vast majority of it, has gone into building these mobile networks. And that has created an industry that today produces $45 billion on the African continent in revenue every year. And that's projected to increase from 45 billion, this is all according to the World Bank, to between 58 and $60 billion within the next 4 years. And the biggest growth area is data. However, if one looks at the average price of data on the African continent, it ranges between about 10 and $20 per gigabit. Now, according to Ofcom, in the UK, your average household uses 60 gigabit of data per month, watching TV, downloading things, whatever households do with their data. So if you extrapolate that to the price of data which people are accessing over their mobile devices, you get to a cost of between $600 and $1,200 a month to access the same amount of data as your average UK household does. So, obviously mobile is not delivering in terms of speed and quantity of data, and that is really why we see the next frontier of investment into Africa is not only data, but bringing the real internet into people's businesses and into people's homes, and allowing people to have data speeds of 100 megabit per second in their houses, and be able to use data in the same way that people do in Europe and other developed parts of the world. A recent statistic that came out of some of the markets we were working in is that 98% of the internet is accessed on mobile devices. Yet, again, if you look at UK statistics, only 2% of the volume in the UK is consumed by mobile. 98% of the volume is delivered using fixed line and fiber. So that really is where we see the next threshold of business development and investment in the African continent to come from.
Well, Nick, let me push you a little bit, because Africa is not one country, it's 54 countries on the continent, and the opportunities probably differ from across the continent. Can you talk to us briefly? When you look at from east to west, where do you see the opportunities for investors who are interested in the sectors?
Well, I mean, we're covering with fiber 14 countries now in Africa, so it's not the whole continent, but we're making a start. And, as I say, I think the backhaul fiber networks across the continent have been built, the sea cables are in, and really it is now the last mile of putting that high speed capability into people's hands, delivering fiber directly into people's homes and into their businesses. Of the countries that we're focusing on in this conference, I mean, we're rolling out fiber to the home in Rwanda, Uganda, Tanzania will follow. But, within the coming months, we will have 100 megabit per second running into significant parts of Kigali, into people's houses. So, I think that really is as I say, the next phase of telecommunications investment, which is beyond the mobile device.
Thank you, Nick. Drummond, I know that you are aggressively involved in actually using data, not only for the purpose of doing business, but also data's impact to health and education and other sectors that are important to Africa. You may have heard yesterday, the president saying that we're not interested in ICT for the sake of ICT. We're interested in ICT's impact in developing our countries. Talk to us briefly about not only what you do, but also what data represent as a potential for all these sectors in Africa, healthcare and education and so on.
So we've noticed that there's been a profusion of mobile and smartphone ownership in sub-Saharan Africa, and we decided to invest in trying to use this infrastructure to make certain businesses that were heretofore difficult to make it more possible, more profitable. And our current focus is in health insurance. We've developed a platform that identifies individuals biometrically and allows the health insurance companies to really underwrite health insurance at a very affordable cost, but also allows medical service providers to more properly identify their patients, to keep medical records, and to make the whole medical practice a more profitable venture for both the health insurance, the medical practitioner, and of course, by reducing the cost, also more affordable for the policyholder. But we've gone beyond that. We've also deployed the same technology with the financial industry. We've developed a new way of identifying people using both their fingerprints, irises, and other physical features, but also we've developed new algorithms for credit scoring so that financial institutions can provide loans at a very low transactional cost to them. And of course, all of this has been made possible by the ICT infrastructure that's in place. We've seen this in all the countries where we operate, and we think that it's really portends very well for businesses to be able to use this infrastructure at a very low rate of transaction.
You're dealing with governments in most of those countries. You're also dealing with the banks and the insurance companies, how are they reacting to your offering with regard to using ICT to address all the concerns you talked about?
Well, on the government side, one thing that we have is we are able to go into small villages and identify people and give them ID cards or give them driver's licenses. And before, African governments have typically had concentrations around their major towns. So if you wanted an ID card, you have to go to a very big town in order to get your ID card. And of course, the cost is very high. So we can go out into the field, into a village, and identify people at a very low cost and use whatever network infrastructure exists, be it fiber optic or 3G. So for governments, we are allowing them to increase their revenues at constant cost. On the private sector side, we've seen a very enthusiastic embrace of our technology because health insurance, for example, as you know, is a very critical part of the financial industry. And it's been very difficult for many health insurance companies to do health insurance profitably. So what we've done is we've made it possible for insurance companies to sell health insurance at a profit. And so the welcome has been very, very great, and we are very hopeful that we could see this infrastructure deployed wider.
Well, let me push a little bit to be very specific on the investment opportunity. You got a room full of investors, private equity funds. If they were to invest in your line of business, where do you see the opportunities going forward?
I see the biggest opportunity in equipping the small, medium enterprises that to allow them to perform some basic business processes, such as accounting processes. So everything from POS systems to network infrastructure that allows them to connect to their banks. And I see also huge opportunities with allowing insurance companies, financial institutions to more directly connect to their customers, to be able to know who their customers are with a high level of degree of confidence. I think these are all very, very vast areas for investments. And it's just to give you an example, currently it takes about 10 megabytes per person to be properly identified. And around Africa, less than 10% of people have been identified. So you have a huge potential. You have hundreds of millions of people who need to be properly identified so that they can go out, buy insurance, they can go out and be able to borrow money from their banks and be able to be identified to get licenses, various types of licenses. So it's a huge, huge opportunity across the continent.
Excellent. Mike, over to you. I know you look at this sector from a financing perspective and you look at across Africa. Talk to us about what do you see the potential like for investment? What is your institution doing and likely investing in the sectors? What are some of the challenges you're dealing with across the continent?
Okay, thank you. So I agree with both of my two sort of predecessors. The major opportunity in Africa still sits in the infrastructure layers, the telecommunications or the ICT infrastructure layers. So as a banking institution, we predominantly provide long-term funding to, one of the opportunities is the telecommunications infrastructure space. We've been fairly actively involved in financing terrestrial fiber, undersea fiber. We led the financing of the CCOM undersea cable on the east coast of Africa, which really brought true international broadband to the east coast of Africa probably some 7 or 8 years ago now. So really, I think to Nick's point, the two areas where we see massive opportunities and massive amounts of growth still happening are currently in the towers space, the mobile tower space, where increasingly the major operators are looking to divest themselves of their portfolios of infrastructure assets, the actual towers and base stations, in order to do one of two things: either reduce their operating costs in order to bring down the price of the services that they provide, or alternatively to raise capital to invest in new 4G technologies and increase broadband capacity. The second area is in the smaller ICT loops, the broadband networks, small metro networks, etc., where, again, the need for this broadband is driving a very different business model to typically what the GSM operators did when they arrived and they started building out massive networks. So a huge amount of interest in building small bespoke networks and selling broadband. to the market.
Yeah, and I know that Netbank, like most South African companies, are all about South-South partnership, looking beyond just South Africa. As you look at the continent as a whole, where do you see the potential for South-South partnership when it comes to South Africa and the rest of the continent?
Right, so I think South Africa and Nigeria clearly have very, very well developed and very highly established ICT sectors. There almost isn't a country in Africa that doesn't need massive amounts of broadband capacity. Probably the single biggest untapped area for most of the operators has been the rural broadband plays, and those are the areas where they need significant amounts of investment to get telephony to the people, to get broadband access to the people. Right. So Nedbank Capital owns an equity stake in EcoBank, which gives us a very large banking platform, probably the largest banking platform in Africa. And there really isn't a month that goes by where we're not approached by a country in Africa saying, here's an investment opportunity in the ICT space.
Excellent. I have 10 minutes to go, so I can take some questions from the audience, just so that we can make this more interactive. If we can get a microphone in the back, just turn around. If anybody wants to say a few words or ask a question as short as possible, so we can get the panelists here on the front. Just hang on a second. You're going to get a microphone so we can hear you. Go ahead. You stand up and say your name and what do you work for?
My name is Henry Mukwayo. I'm a lawyer. I'm a partner in an international law firm called Brown Rudnick in London. I have seen the growth of ICT working out of London and seeing various opportunities that develop in Africa, especially in Nigeria, where there has been a rollout of the 4G technology, which in the near future hasn't been successful. But what we're seeing increasingly, just like we saw with the mobile phone, we probably, in the data, we probably need to focus on, again, not the fiber optic, but rather the mobile delivery, because that is the reality of Africa. Are there any technologies? Because everything is about technology, really, and invention. And the opportunities are abundant. Certainly in Nigeria, for a client we're working with, we intend to deliver educational services via the mobile phone, where children in the rural areas can access education through one medium, based in Australia, of all places. Right. So has there been an effort in, rather than considering that, maybe the mobile phone is not the way to deliver this, are there any technologies that are being looked at to make this more effective?
Point taken. Deliveries. If you get another question. No, 1, 2, going. That's it. No questions. All right. Mike, can you address the questions about delivery, and then we'll ask the rest of the panelists.
Yeah, I think the technology industry, we're a bit like farmers in that the weather is never quite right, and in the technology industry, the technology is never quite right. There's no perfect technology. I mean, we've got the ability to deliver data wirelessly. That has a fundamental limitation, which is the frequencies. Even by reusing frequencies, there is a limit to the volume of data and speed of data that one can push out. And then there's also the issue of geographical coverage. Now, obviously, that improves and changes over time, but there's a finite amount of frequency, and the more people you have using it, invariably the slower speeds that you have. Way to overcome that is obviously with using new technologies such as fiber and GPON and rolling out fiber. Again, that has an inherent limitation in that it hasn't been rolled out extensively yet. And, I think it's going to take a number more years to roll out fiber networks so that it becomes more pervasive. I mean, I often get asked, when will you stop rolling out fiber? When do you believe that you've, covered a sufficient proportion of the population? And, really my answer to that is that we will never stop rolling out fiber. As we've started on certain segments of the population, we will continue to roll it out as costs decrease, and more people will be able to have super high speeds connected to their homes and businesses. But I think as far as Africa is concerned at the moment, it's a combination of technologies that will deliver what needs to be delivered, and that is wireless umbrellas covering the entire population, and then fiber fixed line technologies plugging into areas of high demand. And ultimately, if we're looking forward, another 10 or 20 years, more and more people being covered by, high-speed connected networks.
All right, Jorman, you probably have your take on the question. You're in the business of delivering ICT for other products. What's your take?
I think the evolution of the smartphone into the phablet that we're seeing now has made it very, very cost-effective and very relatively easy to deploy solutions such as educational solutions out into classrooms. We are seeing now phablets that would cost about $100. They have access to 3G, and it could be something that could be given to a teacher, for example, who can then collaborate with other teachers outside of their immediate area to provide high quality educational material to students. But also we're seeing a lot of parents going from this trend where you've had, in Senegal, for example, 96% of adults own a phone. And now you're seeing the next generation, which is the kids, are starting to own devices, be it a Chinese-made device or an iPad or such things. So we're seeing this proliferation into schools. So I think the future really portends very well for the evolution of provision of services, healthcare, education, finance, through these smart devices. And I think...
Mike, do you have a take on the question of delivery?
Yeah, I think the same answer really. The technology is not the limiting factor. People, again, will reinvent the model again and again, depending on their availability to access backhaul and broadband platforms. So the aspect that we find phenomenal is the number of small businesses starting up to deliver ISP-type services and broadband services to small businesses. I mean, the opportunity there becomes almost infinite. And we are just seeing more and more fiber being laid to be able to deal with that demand.
All right, I have time to take another question from the audience. Yes, the back here.
Yeah, my name is Leonard Jukunu from Fidelity Bank, Ghana. My question is more on harmonization of telecommunication regulation, which I believe is going to break a lot of borders and sort of enhance the potential of the sector, right, and improve deepening, or let me call it teledensity, across Africa, which invariably is going to push development, across Africa. So the question is mainly on where do we see, regulation, and as to in terms of harmonization of telecommunication regulation across Africa, and how soon are we getting there so as to achieve these dividends?
All right, and I guess this is a question to all of you. The question being that the legal regulatory framework of Africa as it is today, with regard to the sector, how is it affecting your business one way or the other? Nick?
Well, seeing we've only got a few minutes left, let me be
very short
brief,
answer.
Yeah, and just say, I don't think progress is happening terribly quickly. Right. It seems to be at times one step forward, one step back.
Right. Drummond?
We're not immediately affected by that. We're more focused on the internet, but of course our customers are, and we're not seeing, like Nick has said, a lot of progress towards this.
I agree. I think limitations in terms of companies being able to become licensed still happening far too slowly, and again, too much spectrum locked up, too much spectrum not being made available to fulfill this demand.
All right, I think that brings us to the end of our session. The key takeaways obviously being that, as we heard yesterday from the heads of state of the 4 countries that we had on the panel, ICT is an important sector, not only in terms of investing in it, but also what it can do to basically contribute to the development of the continent, and I think this has been underscored by the people on the panel. Number 2, the investment is not about mobile, it's also about other things that will build the fundamentals of the sector. It's a fiber, it's a satellite, all the big investment that Mike talked about. Once we invest on the big infrastructure, we have to figure out what we're going to do with it, and I think that's where Drummond comes in terms of education and health and other sectors that could be used to basically boost those sectors with regard to using ICT. Mike, obviously, being very much interested in funding the sector and looking at not only South Africa, but also the rest of Africa as a whole. And to what comes to your point, legal regulatory framework affect the sector as a whole. So reform needs to be speed up so we can make the investment that Mike talked about. So join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you. Well done.